Thank you so much, Doron, for organizing this evening. Thank you all for coming and taking part in this kind of discussion. I would like to call it a discussion and not a lecture because, you know, Zoom is something special. Zoom do not let you have the opportunity to have a direct look at the books, at the typefaces we would like to see this evening. But let me start. I'm going this evening to speak about the typeface aspects, typographical aspects of one of the intricate frameworks of the printed Talmud. The printed Talmud is something that helps us understand the telegrammatic text of the Talmud. Without this structure, I believe learning and having kind of knowledge of the wisdom of the Talmud will be much more difficult. In order to see what I mean, I would like to show you some pictures. Let us start where it is. One second. Okay.
Dr. Tamari, you haven't shared your screen yet.
I didn't. Okay, I'll try.
Sorry.
No problem. I'll try again. Do you see it now?
Yes, just make it, yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's start again. If you ask yourself, where did the format, the typographical format of the printed page of the Talmud begin? I could give you a hint. This comes from the Catholic canonic work, which was called Concordia Gratiani. And this was very known in northern Italy. And exactly out of this place came the first printed chapters of the Talmud. Here's I would try to make a zoom so you could see the laws, the canonical laws are written in black ink, and then you can see the margins where the theme is being spoken and in a few footnotes which are for the text. And this is exactly what later I have a, okay. This is what happened later with the first examples of printed tractates of the Talmud. Here you see the first of the Talmud, Masechet Brachot, which was printed in Pesach 15:9, and you may see a kind of similarity between the text in the middle and then commentaries and other information that comes all around. This tradition was not only by Soncino, then came, of course, the Bomberg edition, which was the first mark framework of the printed Talmud. What is interesting in this example is that a thing that remains until our days, that the first 4 lines are text and the first title, the first word comes afterwards. Here's another double page that you can see. The 4 first lines are given in full space, and then comes the text of the Mishnah and then the discussion afterwards. I would like to show you back a structure that was known in the canonical law, written law of the Catholic Church 300 to 200 years before. So this was Bomberg, and then came, we can see another tradition which was not so aware of what was going on in Italy. This came from Thessaloniki, and then you can see that what they do is printing the main text in the middle, and then Rashi comes. In the corner. Afterwards, we see what happened in an edition that was printed for those who had not enough money to buy an edition of the Talmud. It was printed in Frankfurt der Oder in the 17th century. And this was given as a present for 500 Talmidei Chachamim, those who could afford, who wanted to learn, but did not have the money to buy those expensive books. Lots of researchers and scholars speak about the opportunity of learning and having the opportunity to learn and have a bit of the Talmud knowledge without having a rabbi or a knowledgeable teacher when they have the printed book. This is not so correct, because if you try to read the book without any assistant or help, you will find it very difficult to make your way through. You have to know before you start what is this structure of this page, of this double page, and without that you won't be able to come through. Even though I think that reading alone the Talmud is very difficult. This is why you should have some company in order to read what you see, what you can see here, because most of the commentary around the text is not given any introduction to what you are going to see here. Let's go further. Here's, we are now in the 18th century, and we come now to the almost last chapter of the development of the printed Talmud. You see the main page in the middle, and then around the page you have all the commentaries. these are not only commentaries, these are co-condenses and further information that one should know what they mean and how you could use them. This is a second or a third stage of the structure printed page, which is very important for the one who studies the text. This comes from Amsterdam, the family of props that made long efforts and invested very much in printing and getting the best manuscripts, and it could bring forth in order to print the best edition that you could have at the middle of the 18th century. The second stage will be, would call it a tragic set of the Talmud. This is the Shapira edition of the Slavita printing that was printed in the middle of the 19th century. This was called by many scholars the best Talmud that one could have at those times. Afterwards came the best version that we have to our days, almost. This is the Vilna Shas, which is to our days, so to say, the standard work. But before, this is another edition that I wanted to show you. And here, if you have a look of the structure, you may see that we won't go to detail here. You can see here that most of the details here are readable in a very light and simple way. One knows exactly where to find what he looks for, because the text, in the middle is not so easy to understand. So you have to read all the information that goes in more than 2 or 3 margins on the right and on the left. What is interesting here, I would go back to the Vilna Shas and try to okay. The Vilna Shas shows us we have here the text in the middle. We have the commentary in both and on the right side, and then we have more than glossas here, right and left and behind and downstairs. And then we have what I couldn't bring it to you on the picture. What we have here, if you may have a look, what can't be seen on the double spread is brought to you after the text, because we have here a problem of text that accumulates. The Talmud on itself stays the same. The commentary are getting more and more and more, and one do not know anymore how to bring them in this small double spread. This is a problem that everyone that reads or studies the Talmud has to fight with, because you have more than 5 fingers to use in order to get through all the information that belongs to a sentence or two on the Talmud text. Okay. This is what is so, for me, so interesting when I'm talking about the architecture of the Talmud, because as you can compare it with architectural or design of other things that we have in our daily, such as if we I'll give you a kind of example. If you rent a car, you know exactly where to find all the things that you need in order to drive it before you start driving. This is the way. This is what you see here when you open a new volume of the Talmud, because the Talmud has a strict structure that could assist you in reading of the text that is, how shall I call it, not so easy to understand on the first glimpse. Another thing that is very interesting is the use of the letters. From the beginning, the printing of the Talmud used letters that were not so used by the Ashkenazic communities. And those were the majority of the scholars that used the Talmud and read the Talmud and printed the Talmud. And this questions, why did the Talmud printers used Sephardic letters? Here, for example, you can see the wonderful Bomberg letter, which was this is a wonderful Sephardic. I must apologize for the quality of the pictures, but this is the best I could find using the pictures I have in my ability. This is the Sephardic letter of the Bomberg printing. This is another Sephardic letter that was used in Thessaloniki. And if we go further, we could see in the middle of Frankfurt on the Oder, which is on the very near to Poland. Even there you can find, sorry for the quality of the letter, one can find a Sephardic letter. Another, and then in Amsterdam and in Slavita and so on. And until now, nowadays, we use for the Talmud this letter, which is everything but Ashkenazic. And this is the letter that goes with the Talmud from the first day of its existence. This is one of the questions I couldn't find any plausible answer why it was used by the printers. But what you can see in the 500 years of history of the printed Talmud is that this tradition remains very, very strict. Even in the modern times where you can find digital versions of the Talmud, they use the same Sephardic letter, which is very interesting. And one asks himself, how could this strict structure of the printed page became so good and strict as in other literature of the Jews, one may see more development and more change through the centuries. These are questions one would like to ask himself, and you too. It would be very interesting to hear from you what you think about it. My theme is to try to understand why on one hand, you have such a strict structure. On the other hand, you try to open this strict format of the book to more and more information that one could read and understand and come forth without using other ways of information. This is, I will try to show you the, I suppose that you know the new edition of Oz Vehadar, which tries to bring all these history of the Talmud in a very nice introduction of some 20 pages, but the questions that are brought there do not bring any answer. Why is this so strict? Yes, this is in, so to say, in a few words, and I hope I could bring it on a comprehensible way to you in order to understand the contradiction between very loosely written text, which is not a linear text, and a very strict structure that gives very open ends or betweens in order to find some clue on or answer for questions that stay open. Generally speaking, I would say that the Talmud, although more than 1,000 years is taught and learned, and we work with this very important, I would say the most important text of the Jewish tradition, the Talmud is still to be listened, to be taught, to be understood. I don't think that even the modern way of bringing the Talmud on the digital version, to say that you can have all the historical commentaries and glossa and so on, even this development doesn't bring us further in order to have the whole picture of the Talmud. In other words, the Talmud is still remains a big question mark. The typographical assistance of this in form of this architecture assists you, so you cannot get lost and don't find your way. Where have you been? You can compare it with other mentions and other citations from other books, but even the typographical base, which is, as I try to show, even the typographical basic of the text brings the Talmud in a kind of assistance, but not so more than this. I'm sure that the more we try to compare the different editions of the Talmud, and this is still waiting for us. We don't have a comparable and an edition of the Talmud which compares all the editions that were printed until or written until now. There's not a comprehensive work of the Talmud. In this way, this will assist us or give us the possibility to see it as a living text inside a very strict cage. So if you have questions, I would like very much to come in discussion with you in order to be able, yeah. Doron?
Yes, thank you very much. There are quite a few questions. I apologize in advance. We won't be able to read all of them. I'm just going to stop your share, Dr. Tamari. Okay, so Eliza asked, what is the red in the Catholic text of the, I believe it's the first book you showed us.
Yes, can I show it again?
Absolutely.
Here we are. These are Catholic laws, the Canon Law. Sorry, I have to.
You're not sharing, yes. Okay, great.
I'm trying. Okay. This is the so-called Canon Law of the Catholic Church, which was very familiar, very popular in the 13th century in the north of Bologna, for example, in the north of Italy. These books were written per hand, of course, and were known everywhere. You can find it not only in the large library of the Vatican, but also, say, in Munich or in other big libraries, which I know. So the Canon Law of the Catholic Church. Doron, the next
Thank you.
question.
Yes, thank you very much. Elaine asked, well, she had 3 questions. The first one is, do you think God oversaw the writing? 2 is, how many different writers contributed to the writing of the Talmud? And the third is, are there discrepancies in the Talmud?
Of course, I would start with the last question. Of course, there are discrepancies. You must see the Talmud as a very loose text. It was written as a kind of short notices of a discussion of lots of discussions that were made some 4 to 5 centuries, where people were sitting in schools and were discussing everything. So discrepancies are to be found. The other questions were, did Lord oversaw what was written? My private view of the whole thing, I think God, the Lord, is everything, and everything you do is known. So the other question is God, does he find it okay, or is it a problem for him what you wrote? This is another question, which Job would have given a better answer that I may say. The second question was, who were the most important scholars that gave added to the Talmud. I would say that Rashi was the first of them. He was the one who, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, by the way, he managed to assist the reader with adding 1 to 3 words to every problem that a reader in the future might find be in trouble with. So he could give him a hand, so to say, in order to read it further. He was not alone. His family, his grandchildren, and the whole tradition that came behind him gave another very important commentary. You find Rashi on the inner, if I'll try to bring this, okay. Rashi, you could find, if you see my cursor, Rashi, you will find on the commentary that is always on the inside of the page, whereas the commentary of his grandchildren and those who came after them, you will find on the commentaries outside, on the left or right side of the page. Those are the Tosafists, as you call them in the tradition. Of course, you have other commentaries, the commentary of Maimonides, which unfortunately didn't come to our hands, but the Jews in Yemen, one was told, could read his commentary, but unfortunately, we know about this commentary only from commentaries of others. So not every commentary, not every addition to the Talmud came to us. We must see ourselves as very lucky to have the tradition of some of those very interesting commentaries that those learned people wrote for us to assist us understanding this very loosely text. Yes, Doron, please.
Thank you very much. There are 2 people who asked similar questions. I'll read them both. David asked, before being printed, what was the handwritten form of the Talmud? And Joe asked, what did the Daf of Talmud look like before the printing press?
Oh, that's a very, very nice, very interesting question. I would like you, all of you, to give you a name. The only text of the whole Talmud that was handwritten by a scribe, one who wrote the Talmud in the 13th century. You can find it in the State Library of Munich. So if you go to the library website of them, you will find it, the Munich Talmud, which is a complete version of the Talmud written by hand from Brachot, from the beginning to the end. And the second question, which is very, very important, was how was it written? It was written as the writer found it for good, for plausible for his work. And sometimes we have this problem to our days. You cannot define what was the text of the Talmud and what is the text and where is the text of the commentary. This is a problem that we have until our days. But in the handwritten versions that are very, very few, but very important, one can find some versions that you won't find in the printed version, because the moment the Talmud was printed, the handwritten version that were much more expensive than the printed versions disappeared, and the people that wrote the Talmud didn't have to write it again in so many copies, because a printed Talmud could be printed in 500, 1,000 copies and be distributed much easier than a written one. So the moment the printed Talmud appeared on the stage, so to say, this was the day of the disappearance, of the quiet disappearance of the handwritten Talmud. A very sad change in the history of the Talmud. Yes, Doron.
Thank you very much. Judith and several other people asked if you could please explain the difference between Sephardic and Ashkenazi letters. There was a discussion going on between a few people trying to decide if that included Rashi's writing or not, Rashi's text.
Okay, let's try to make a clear distinction between Ashkenazic and Sephardic letter. It begins with the tool with which you write the letter, you produce the letter. The Sephardic letter is written with a kind of, the word in English is another word, you write it with another tool than you write it with the Ashkenazic. So the difference between the thick and the thin lines is not so obvious. Whereas in the Ashkenazic letter, you see a huge difference between the thick letter lines and the thin ones. You can compare it with the Gothic letter. In a way, the Gothic letter has also this characteristic in which the letter differs between thick lines and thin lines. This is basically, without going inside the details, the difference between the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic letter. I would say to the history or to the characteristics of the Hebrew letter is that the Hebrew letter, in comparison to the Latin letter, is much more simpler and bears less information than the Latin letter. A few Hebrew letters resemble to each other. So it is much more difficult to produce good readable Hebrew letters more than Latin letters. So that's why the Ashkenazic letter has been seen as a, in quote marks, problematic letter, because you don't see much difference between a few letters. In the Sephardic style, you may see a better difference, which is maybe this is why the Sephardic letter was chosen to be the letter of the main text of the Talmud. To the Rashi typeface, I will start with saying that Rashi didn't write in this letter. He didn't know that this letter was existing. This letter comes from Spain, and this is called Rashi letter as a mistake, because the first commentary of the Bible was printed in Reggio di Calabria in 4075 and was using this Sephardic half cursive letter. And this is why during the years it was called the Rashi letter, meaning this was the typeface with which the commentary of Rashi was printed with. So what you call nowadays Rashi letter is not a letter that Rashi was using or even reading. It is only because the first printed version was printed using those letters. I hope I could give an answer to this question. Yes, Doron.
Yes, thank you very much. Stefan asked, are the texts of printed versions taken from single manuscripts, or were they the result of a process of comparison?
Of course, they are a very, very complicated result of searching for versions, because nobody had the whole Talmud in his synagogue or in his house or elsewhere. Until the printed Talmud was printed, most of the learned people could read, say, 2, 10, 20, 50 tractates of the Talmud. Only a few of them could have the opportunity of reading the whole Talmud. After printing the Talmud, you could gather all the information you had and read everything that was printed. This is the big stage in order to see the whole work. But after the first version came out, the handwritten versions were not so important for other printers, because most of the printers used to use earlier versions of printed Talmud in order to print their own version or edition of the Talmud. So most of the printed Talmuds repeat failures and mistakes that appeared already in the first or second edition of the Talmud. Our researchers in the last 50 or say 100 years are trying to find the, in quotes, the version that was the version of the Talmud without some kind of corrected text that the typesetters, that the editors during the last 1,000 years have added to the original. It is a very complicated editorial and archaeological process. And I think it is also a very important subject to deal with, although this is not my theme this evening, but the version, the edition of the Talmud is one of the most informative and interesting themes of the Talmud. How was the Talmud, how it became what we know today as the text of the Talmud. Yes, Doron.
Thank you very much. Chaim asked a question. Are there differences in the content between the different prints?
Yes, of course. We have censorship, which was done by the Catholic Church for years. As you all know, the Catholic Church of Italy tried to forbid the learning of the Talmud, and in order to make it impossible, they had the tradition of burning manuscripts and printed versions of the Talmud. Bamberg was forced to pay a huge sum of money in order that the deputy of the Vatican would allow him to print a known number of his edition. And this is why we have this problem of the version of the Talmud, because when you don't have so many editions, so many examples of the Talmud, failures, mistakes, and misinterpretation go inside the text that the generations afterwards print. Until now, to our days, we are very, very busy in finding out the real version. I'm trying to see where did I put my, there are 5 works of students of the Talmud that tried for 5 to 10 years, each of them, work on one tractate to find the correct wording of a tractate, and not always you can find the real one, because in the time of more than 1,000 years, so many mistakes came inside and so many problems were involved. So it is a very interesting, a very complicated theme that has less to do with our theme here of the printed, but there are, of course, printed versions, different versions. And if you open the Basel version, you will find lots of differences between the one that we know from Bamberg or the one that we know from Vilna. And nowadays, those editions that come out, say the Schottenstein, the Oz Hadar, and so on, try to combine, to bring all the different versions and decide what is correct and what is false. Yes, Doron.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Diana Villa actually shared a wonderful resource of Geniza and different fragments from Geniza, and also almost all the manuscripts. So she and I also highly recommend looking that link up. Dr. Tamari, the last question I will ask is Katarina's question, excuse me. And she asked, were there any similar known earlier texts with such structure in any other culture?
To my best knowledge, and I would like to remain humble in this saying, no. What I was trying to show before was only the appearance of a canon law, but what this kind of tense between a loose text and a very strict structure is not known in any other culture that use printed texts.
Thank you very, very much. I will open microphones. Thank you all for coming from all over the world and participating with us. Hope to see you in our next event. Thank you very much, and Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
Laila Tov from New York.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.
כל טוב. ערב טוב.
שלום, תודה. להתראות.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
שבוע טוב.
שבוע טוב ומבורך.
And remain healthy.
Very much.
You.
Dr. Tamari.
Dr. Tamari,
Yes.
can I ask you a question? So Cincino printed the first Talmud. So we have Rashi on one side, you have Tosfot on the other, and then Bamberg maintained that, right? So do we have any reason why Cincino chose the format he chose? I know you mentioned the Catholic Church, the Canon Law idea, but once that was set, it was maintained by Bamberg, which we maintain today all the way through the Ram Press. But what made, or do we have any kind of textual evidence or any notes of why Cincino really formatted the page that's been maintained today?
You know, we have so many questions that won't be answered. For example, who cut the typeface for Cincino, a wonderful typeface? Who cut the typefaces for Bamberg? Yes, you have theses, people wrote so many books about it, but you don't have any answer for this.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, the standard that Sonsino and then Bomberg made still remains to our days. So
It's amazing. It's a miracle, really.
it's a miracle. This is what I was trying to convey. This strict structure, so strict you don't find it anywhere in the world of printed texts. It is strict. On the other other hand, you have a loose written text that no one can read as a text.
Right.
It's unreadable, if I may say so.